Alexandra Wicksell, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. One of our most exciting guests for this season in London. And to start unfolding your amazingness, let's start with who you are, what do you do, and why do you do it?
The three hardest questions in life, isn't it? So my name is Alexandra. I am a creative communications consultant. I help companies and people reimagine their vision and tell awesome stories through a bunch of different ways. I do it because I've been through quite a crazy journey myself, and I realized that the most important thing, whether you're an owner of a company or a person, the story you tell yourself and others is really what shapes your reality. So if you want to grow an amazing brand, your vision and the story that you tell your customers is what they're going to buy, not your product. So I want to help as many people as possible who are doing good things for the world to tell those incredible stories.
Stories seems to be getting a whole lot of attention. And I'm not talking about Instagram stories. Your company's name is Tribe3.
Tribe3, yeah.
Tribe3.
Yeah.
Do you find that people are struggling to come up with purposeful stories?
No, actually, there is a whole abundance of purpose stories out there. I think the problem is really to tell authentic stories. And most of those stories, they're born out of what you believe. So a lot of people sort of rush in, as it's very fashionable today, to tell stories of purpose, of impact, of, changing the world. A lot of people are focusing on the way they're telling the story rather than actually doing what they're doing. So I try really to help my clients go back and look at their actions and their behaviors before they start telling that story. Because once you have that nailed down and you understand why you're doing what you're doing, the story unfolds in a very authentic way. And that is what people buy. That's what they love.
When do we start being authentic when we tell a story as a company?
When do we stop being authentic? I mean, it's a very fine line between telling a story so oftentimes the stories that are powerful are the stories of vision. So where are we going? We want to get people excited to come along on the journey. And there is a very fine line between saying this is what we want to do and this is what we're actually doing. I think when you start to tell stories of what you're doing, but you are doing things that are not that, and you're getting, in a different direction to get quick wins, to gain more customers, you're sort of putting yourself on a path where you're going to go in two different directions pretty quickly. So your story is going to run in one direction and your actions in the other. And that is when it gets slippery and not very good.
So we set out to tell a story through the company we've built, but we end up living a different story. Is this what you're saying?
I was reading this article actually the other day about the founder of Tom's, the shoes company. And he set out his mission to basically help people get access to shoes, which he thinks is a very good way of empowering people and get them out of poverty. He set out that journey in a very organic way and then continued to grow more and more and more and found himself at a position where he was like, we're now a commercial company, we're huge. I feel like I've completely lost touch with our original mission. And he took time off to actually rethink that and launched another branch or another product to get closer to his mission of helping people and helping the world. So I think it's very, very common that we set out in a direction and, we get lost on the way. But the key is not to, punish ourselves for that, but rather say, okay, this is where we are right now. If we want to move forward with intention and with our purpose, we have to rethink how we're doing things.
When do you meet your customers? At what stage of their life?
It's really different. Some companies I've worked with, I start when they just have an idea. So they have come up with their business idea, they have an incredible team, a really good product, but they don't have the story to match that. And those are really exciting clients to work with because they are very open to influence and to understand where the world is going more generally and then position themselves on that track. Or I work with more established companies that are being eaten up by the competition, that have startups that are taking their market share because they're not renewing themselves. The biggest benefit is that when you become really clear on where you're going and why you're doing what you're doing, everybody else can tap into one part of that. People can really relate. They can say, wow, like I love that journey you're on. I want to partake in that. If you don't have a clear vision and a clear purpose, you oftentimes end up in circles where you do things as an ad hoc. You don't have a very clear direction. Your customers are confused because you launch new products all the time. And in today's online world, you can really do anything. If you have an audience, you can launch whatever you want. But the key is, why are you doing it? Are you doing it to make more money? If that's the case, people usually see through that and they don't get very excited about it. But if you're selling, something that you are really passionate about, they tend to come along if they're passionate about it too.
Before we go into your professional CV, let's talk a bit about the personal one, because you were born in
Sweden, in Stockholm.
In Stockholm, but all of your studies had been about the Middle East.
Yeah.
So what does a girl in Stockholm have to do with that part of the world, and how does your intellectual curiosity evolve into a profession?
That's a really good question, actually. One that I've asked myself many times as well.
I've asked you that in the past.
I know we've talked about it before.
And now I want to get. Now we're coming to an answer.
Exactly. Well, so I was born to Swedish-Ethiopian parents. My grandfather is Ethiopian. Him and my grandmother are the first Swedish-Ethiopian marriage in the world, which has provided me with a whole different lens than most Swedish people.
How did your grandparents meet?
It's a beautiful story, actually. My grandfather was over in Sweden 60 years ago now on a training for the Air Force. And he met my grandmother. They fell in love. She went back to Ethiopia with him. Wow. And raised 3 kids. And
kids were raised in Sweden?
In Ethiopia, in Addis. So my mom is half Swedish, half Ethiopian. She was born and raised in Ethiopia. They were always back and forth, but came to Sweden when she was 13 to live permanently. So it's quite an interesting journey, but it really brought me into the world with a whole different perspective than most people growing up in Sweden. And at the time I was growing up, there was not a lot of mixed kids. I grew up in a very white community.
Homogeneous.
Very homogeneous, and still is today, but with a lot more exciting influence and mixes. You see, the immigration has really spiced things up in the best possible way. But at the time, it was very culturally there was only one lens to look at things. And I never took that for granted. I never sort of accepted that as the status quo. We traveled a lot when I was a kid, which I've always been very grateful for to my parents, because it has allowed me to see myself in a bigger context rather than just Swedish.
What's your first memory from traveling?
Oh, wow. That's a very good question. I think one thing that has really stayed with me when it comes to traveling, and I think I sort of explored this very, very early on, was that no matter where you are in the world, and if you speak the language, if you're in a remote place, we have this incredible ability to connect as humans. And that sort of sense of going somewhere very far, but still being able to smile and play and be with people as humans really, really got to me, and it got me super excited about traveling. It was always that cultural differences that got me excited to continue travel. So having grown up in Sweden, I went to, one of the best schools you can go to from an educational perspective. And I really had an incredible upbringing, but I was curious about the world, and I really I had this sort of perspective of being mixed. And I guess now in hindsight, when I think about it, I was always seeking some kind of explanation or some kind of belonging, which took me out in the world. And I moved to the US first. I lived in Boston for a while, and then I moved to London. I did my studies here. And then after that, I was living all over, like Africa, Middle East, the US. And it's been such an incredible journey, but what really brought me back to that perspective of connecting with people has brought me a sense of home in the world that I think I was always looking for in Sweden when I was a kid. Like I felt at home, but not to the same degree that I do in the world and when I connect with communities. So,
what are some of the countries you lived in?
I lived one of my favorite countries, and it will always be a favorite country living in, is Tunisia. I was there for more than a year after the revolution, the Arab Spring. And I lived and I worked there, and I have now a beautiful extended Tunisian family of people that I really connected with on a deep level. So it's a place that is very close to my heart. I obviously love buzzing cities like New York and Hong Kong. Both are really incredible places to live in. But Tunisia helped me acquire a whole new set of cultural references that you only get when you really immerse yourself in another culture. So I learned the language, Arabic, French, but also the customs and the ways of living that I had never experienced living in the West.
How did that experience service you later in life, later professionally?
I mean, it did everything for me, really. I mean, when I look back at my 20s, I see episodes of my own journey that don't fit into what a career development advisor would tell you to do. So the times when I was backpacking through South and Central America with a friend when I just turned 18, living in Tunisia. Those are the moments where I really grew as a person. I got to know myself without the help or reference to a theory or a book or a teacher. I got to really explore my own strength and my own fears as well.
Is there a startup scene in Tunisia?
There is, but a very small one. Unfortunately, the country has not recovered very well after the revolution, and it is in a deep economic crisis at the moment. So the irony is that there is no formal startup scene as we see in, Tel Aviv or Beirut, for example. But what I love about the country, and you see this in a lot of places around the world, especially in the developing world, everyone is an entrepreneur. When you have nothing, you manage to create, and you create innovative solutions. And if you look at the street vendors, how they've managed to just, put an offer together with absolutely zero resources. There's no paid marketing. There's no strategies. There's just pure necessity. And I find that super inspiring when I travel around, India and Africa. I see so many of these incredible creators that are doing things that we sit in courses or online programs to learn. So being out there and being in the world is, I find, the best lesson you can actually absolutely get yourself.
How long have you been in London now?
On and off for 10 years.
On and off for 10 years.
So,
do you feel like you've slowed down your career trajectory a little bit, or at least less shifty?
I have, yes, in a way. I mean, my career trajectory has really been like a phoenix situation. I dive into something, I go all in, and then I burn, and then I rise again. So having started in the development field and working on the ground, the grassroots level around communications, I transitioned into marketing and data, working for Cambridge Analytica. I knew nothing about marketing and data. I studied international politics and Middle Eastern studies, but I learned it because it was really interesting and it was fascinating to learn. So I went all the way into the non-governmental space, and I went all the way into the other space. And I have landed in the way that I know now where I want to go. I have built my own vision of my future and left a lot of room for that vision to come about in a very organic way. I don't think we can at all control where we're going, but we can have some kind of North Star to aim towards. So, yes, definitely.
So let's talk about reality and expectations and control. Cambridge Analytica started off as a data analytics company. It was associated with Facebook, a big scandal, political controversies. There's plenty of material for people who want to dig deep. But for Alexandra Wicksell of January 2017, Cambridge Analytica was a promising startup to work for.
I mean, actually taking it even further back, when I started at Cambridge Analytica, it was not even Cambridge Analytica, it was SEL Group, and it was a small comms agency that was founded by two, like an ex-Sachi, storyteller. So it wasn't at all what it came to be known for. It was just a very traditional sort of madman kind of agency working around the world on traditional comms contract. It was when the former CEO, Alexander Wicksell, discovered the power of data that the company became Cambridge Analytica and set up the operations in the US. So having seen that growth from being a small agency of less than 20 people and being part of building it into a 140 people almost company, going in a very unconventional way, because oftentimes these startups, they start with an idea, they raise money, they go out and they do it. Here it came with a whole inherited legacy of a company that is also part of the problem with the stories that have been told about the company today, because it goes back to 89. So you have so many different paths of that company before it even became Cambridge Analytica.
So what were you hired to do for SEL Group?
I was actually starting as an intern right after my master's. So I began working with them for the summer while I was writing my master's. And then I think I've had as many roles in that company as you can possibly have. As you know, with any startup, you do everything. I became a project coordinator after that, and then a project manager, and then a director, and then a solution architect, and just you do everything.
So let's slow down. What is a project coordinator for a data analytics company? What does that mean? What is a project?
So what we did back in the days when I was a coordinator, we would get a traditional contract with a company or a government where we were set out to do market research, to understand the problem they were facing. We would do data analytics, and then we would come up with a strategy to engage with that audience.
So what tools did you have at your disposal as a project coordinator? Who are you working with?
So I was working under the project manager, and at that time we were like, there were like 3 or 4 project managers. So as a coordinator, I was supporting them writing proposals, writing reports, but pretty quickly in that role, and because of the growth, I became a project manager straight away. So it was a question of managing, coordinating resources, everything from the creative designers to the data scientists to the salespeople. So when you get assigned a project, you become responsible for making that project come alive, basically.
How many people were in the company when you joined?
We were under 20 people.
Under 20. So you were working pretty close with senior management.
Yeah.
Okay. And now you've moved one step ahead. You're no longer an intern or project coordinator. You're a project manager. What type of projects were you working on?
So one of my first projects, and this is the process in which I became a project manager. When I was still a coordinator, I was assigned to one of the biggest research projects that was ever conducted in Saudi Arabia at the time, in collaboration with McKinsey and BCG. So they were working on the 2030 vision and reshaping the vision for the whole country. And we were tasked to go in and look at the population and understand the pains, the aspirations, behaviors, attitudes around this shift. And we were a small team from Cambridge, and I was assigned to initially go and support one of the managers of the project due to unforeseen circumstances, had to jump off. So I got allocated a lot more responsibility very quickly, and that included managing the research. And we went around the whole country to every sort of city, town, village, north, south, west, east. And we conducted focus groups, we conducted quant surveys.
So from intern to working at an international level,
Yeah.
how long has it been? How long are you in the company now?
8 months.
8 months.
Even.
That's a huge gap to fill in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
How did you step up to fill those shoes?
It was a question of really. It's interesting when you ask that, because in hindsight, I
don't know what the fuck I was doing.
Exactly. I was like, how on earth did I manage to do this? I was literally running focus groups with the military in Saudi Arabia in a language that I didn't know.
Super machoistic environment where women are second-class citizens still, and you're just stepping up to take on this big role and talk about imposter syndrome.
Yeah. No, it was, you know what, when you're in the situation, and this is for everything in life, you just do what you have to do. And the other option you have is to jump off and say, no, I don't want to do this. But like, I was in my zone. I loved it. Any challenge, the bigger it is, the more fun it is. So it was a question of working with the resources that I had at hand, and then identify what other resources I needed and collaborate with the people on the ground.
So that deliverable in that project basically means you give some sort of a recommendation to a government and they decide whether to act on it or not and how to act on it. Fine. Let's fast forward another level, and now you've completed this project, you've established yourself in the company, you've proven you can step up and take on more responsibility, and you go back to Cambridge. What's happening next?
So at that time when I came back, so this project was a long project. We worked out there for 9-10 months almost. By the time I came back, the company had really become Cambridge Analytica, and we had started branching into data analytics, hired a lot more data scientists. So I naturally merged into what became the commercial side of the business, where we went out and we used a lot of the same techniques and tools to help companies get more customers.
What did Cambridge Analytica back then promised its customers? What was the selling proposition?
That's a really good question, because it changed a lot. What we were doing at the time was really providing a lot broader and a lot more comprehensive view of audiences out there. So we were using data from different sources, commercial data, public data, and we also used our own behavioral science techniques to run surveys. And then, combine all of them and extrapolate it across a population to run a communications.
So basically taking data from all sorts of sources, social media, publicly available data that the company has gathered, and trying to connect the dots.
Yeah, exactly. So it was really an experiment, because no one, and this is a common experiment in the industry. A lot of people think that Cambridge was the only one doing it, but all the big agencies were experimenting with the same thing. We were all trying to harvest the data that was out there to better understand people. And a lot of that was failed attempts, which was never really communicated.
A failed attempt would be, we're giving recommendations that don't really work, our algorithm doesn't really predict behavior.
Yeah, so the sort of big 5 personality algorithms that Cambridge became very known for was a work in progress. It was by no means something completed, and it worked in certain client contexts, but not others. So when you do it for, an outreach campaign, it is a lot more difficult to gain accuracy than it is to do an internal communication piece for already existing customers, where you can actually understand behaviors with a lot more accurate data than you can with Facebook data.
And what's the 5 personality thing you just mentioned?
So it's called the Ocean system, and it's basically a way of understanding your personality traits and how agreeable you are, how much you have in terms of locus of control, how much you feel like you are in charge of your own life. And a lot of marketing sort of agencies use this model to understand people beyond their preferences and sort of consumer behaviors.
So I want to make sure I understand. So the company would take data, aggregate it, process it, and then the output would be a personality type. So you would segment the people in that target audience into different personalities, and then you would create campaigns that match this person's personality.
Exactly. That was the intent. The experiment of it all was a lot more challenging. So it worked when the campaign was based on internal data. I know this is a controversial claim. A lot of people say it works when you run large campaigns and match it with Facebook audiences as well. I think it comes down to A/B testing. You have to really see whether it works in that context. And anyone who tells you that they can guarantee a behavioral personality campaign approach will probably oversell.
So usually what you would get is that information is then being used to drive commercial goals. I know how to pitch that specific product to that person to get them to buy it. Do I need to emphasize the product benefit, or do I need to emphasize the branding aspect of it, for example? When did a commercially minded organization became political?
It actually happened the other way around. So they were using a lot of these. So with the US elections, for example, in America, you have an opt-out culture, which means that these big companies can collect a lot of data, and unless you're opting out of it, that data is being resold. And a lot of companies buy that data to then run huge commercial campaigns. What we did back in the days in the political space was basically taking the public political data out there and combining it with the commercial data to get a whole new view of the political electorate.
So many breakthroughs in startup worlds come when you take one form of one methodology or one technology and you implement it in a new space.
Totally.
A place where it hasn't been implemented before. It's like NASA technology that's now being used to sell running shoes. These types of things. So back then, you realized you're already working for a company who's promoting or helping politicians. Did you understand it was different than the company you've joined?
Yeah, it changed a lot throughout the process. And what I always find fascinating, which hasn't really been brought out in the media coverage, is the culture that existed on the ground. So we were really a team of young, very ambitious and very curious people coming from the startup world, coming from the tech world, looking to really, create something new. I think the legacy and part of the management of the company came from a different world. And seeing these clashes between the two was always a fascinating process. It was not seamless at all. It was sort of old ways of doing things versus new ways of doing things.
Yeah, you're saying fascinating and you're saying clashes. What are other words to describe what it felt like working there at the time?
I mean, it was really, I would never have stayed as long as I stayed if it wasn't for the people there. So a lot of the data scientists, a lot of the psychologists that I work with were absolutely brilliant people, really incredible. And it became like a family because we worked super late some nights and, we were there together, which also was incredible to see during the fall of the company. So when it went bankrupt and that whole clash, we all became a lot closer and there for each other.
When did things start to take a turn for the worst? What happened?
I think it was really when Cambridge Analytica got the Trump contract that things changed. Because up until that point, we were still a small agency and we were completely unknown to the world. No one knew about us. So we were doing our thing, and the Trump contract, which I think no one in the company expected, us to win came about. And it really challenged a lot of people there, me included. I was very hesitant to continue working for the company because I didn't didn't support the political ideology. But it started growing so fast after that, and everyone from every side of the political spectrum, commercial, wanted to understand what we were doing, and they wanted a piece of it. So the company just grew too fast for what it had the capacity to handle. And yeah, in like a year's time, we tripled in size.
How did you learn that you won the Trump contract?
How did we learn?
It's like an email, an all hands.
I think we had at the time a big issue of communication. There was no sort of central communication hub in the company. So most of the things spread through word of mouth. Someone had told someone who told someone. And one day we were all called into a meeting, and it would just, they told us right there and then. And quite a few people left, actually, straight away, especially on the data side, because they realized that they were going to be pulled in.
Yeah, that's immediately, you're in a potential conflict with your morals.
Yeah, exactly. I decided I was about to quit, and then I had a conversation with someone very close to me who said, listen, you're very hungry and very ambitious. Wherever you go, if you go into another big company, there are going to be challenges morally for you there as well. And what you can do is take charge of what you participate in and how you contribute. So I took a conscious decision to stay because it was an exciting time of growth, but I didn't want anything to do with the campaign. I wanted to work on the European side. I wanted to stay with the commercial projects and not get sucked into that.
So now the company is tripling its size in over a year. You get pulled into all these meetings that are happening. All sorts of famous people start being in touch. You're getting emails from the chambers of the most important people, powerful people in the world. What does that feel like? Feeling that success, but also being conflicted by it?
I think in hindsight, I was ignoring my own well-being for the sake of that growth. I was so caught up and so excited in the growth that was happening that I didn't see how it impacted myself. I was working for a company that had incredible people, but were going in a direction that I didn't really subscribe to.
You said that you had to ignore your well-being in order to participate in what was happening. And I think that's understandable. Growth equals pain in so many respects. But when is enough? When do you know that you have to stop ignoring your well-being and change the course of direction?
I mean, I had to learn it the hard way. Because when the company actually crashed, I had a whole personal life crisis that had built up. And I think this was just a tipping point for me to see my whole safety net, security, everything just being pulled away. But I saw the warning signs a lot earlier than that. I was working in a very unhealthy way. I was working long hours. I was not taking care of myself. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. And I think you come to a point when you work in a startup where you realize that you sort of lose track of why you started. And you are just in this sort of wheel of doing for the sake of doing.
It starts circling back towards purposeful stories, but we're not quite there yet. You say you've put a lot of pressure on yourself. What does that look like?
A lot of self-critique, a lot of unnecessary high bars that are mentally and physically unattainable. So I'm never going to stop being ambitious and hungry and, being out there. But I think there is a different approach to it. And what I've learned from my own sort of crash was that you can do all of this, but you can do it with compassion and kindness for yourself. And you can set the bar up here, but you can also celebrate every little victory up until that bar.
The sunset of Cambridge Analytica. Back then, you were how many people?
We were almost 140 people.
Almost 140 people. And you joined a company that's 20 people. So the growth has been tremendous. And when did you realize it starts to go belly up?
When did I start realizing? So in March, about March 26th, I think, I started feeling something was wrong in the company. There was a lot of meetings behind closed doors, and being in the position I was at the time, I was sort of tapped into a lot of different teams. So I had quite a good overview of the vibe and the environment of the company. So this 2 weeks running up to a meeting where basically the CEO called us in, Alexandra said, listen, there's going to be a bit of a bump in media. We are going to have some negative press coming out, but don't worry about it. It's not going to be the end of the world. We're going to go through it like everything else. And it was not the first time that we had bad media. But this time, Channel 4 and The Guardian had basically spent about a year, I think, researching the case of Cambridge Analytica as an entry point into what was happening in the world with Trump and Brexit and all of it, and decided to publish a undercover video of a scheme that they had set up, basically catching Nix, the CEO and the head of the political section as well, basically being very, very inappropriate on the video. And for me,
professionally or
both, yeah. So they were talking the big game, promising a lot of things that were not at all morally correct. And for me, up until that point, I had I'd heard all the bad negative press, and I sort of felt bad about it, but it didn't really get to the core of me.
Because it's easy to justify knowing the people that you work with.
Exactly. I knew that the people I worked with were really good people. They had really good moral compass, and we had actually declined me and my team, a lot of contracts that we didn't at all ideologically or morally sort of support. So, but when this video came out, there was something shifted within me. I felt let down. I felt like, someone had cheated on me in a relationship. That was the kind of feeling that I can describe. And I was really, really disappointed and very hurt because I felt like I had been lied to. I had put in so much time and effort into building this company. And quite frankly, this irresponsible behavior became, so everybody suffered from it. So that was really when it shifted. And when I saw that undercover video, I just knew deep down, this time, the company is not going to survive. And then it unleashed a 3-month process of going up and down and going through a phase of, trying to take part of the offering and rebranding it under a new name, and just the whole crisis management it was like taking 3 MBAs in 3 months' time.
Wow.
It was fascinating. And actually, I decided to stay until the very end, even though I was approached by a lot of companies and interviewing and things. I wanted to stay until the end because I realized that was my only shot up until this point to really live what a lot of MBAs teach you as case studies, and actually live it on a very global level.
March 26th, you realized that story had been broken out. You go back home and the narrative had failed. You could no longer tell that story to yourself.
Yeah.
And then came the 3 months of chaos.
Yeah.
Is the company losing employees then?
Yeah, people were dropping off one after the other. We had just gotten a new hire when this happened, who is a brilliant woman. She was the closest thing I had to an incredible mentor in the company. She pulled me over and she said, "Listen, this is not going anywhere." And I realized pretty quickly, like, we were totally on the same page. But she also said, it's a great learning opportunity. So with her, a lot of others left. And especially what was really interesting actually to see, a lot of people that left were the ones that were seeking safe employment and comfort rather than the curiosity of the unknown.
There's a wild side for you professionally that likes going to those types of places.
I think it's because I grew up in a very safe environment.
So there's a risk seeker that grew up inside of you?
Exactly. No, I think it's always been there, and I've always been very curious about the world, but there is a certain aspect of humanity that I've always been fascinated about, and that is the moment of chaos, whether you want to call it like Hobbes' state of complete anarchy, before we recalibrate, before we reshape a new constellation or a new community or a new situation, there is this vacuum of an unknown. And I think we are in that vacuum globally at the moment, where people are seeking, they're sort of like experiencing and observing a lot of change and a lot of disruption, but we haven't landed yet in a new paradigm. So in a way, it's really exciting times to live. And I think the Cambridge situation is such a poster child for that world, because we're just breaking into data and how we are consuming and producing data and how that is impacting our lives. So having been part of the rise of that, but also the fall of one of the early sort of beta versions of it, I think seeing the very end of it and the chaos of the end of it was just, I knew that was going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity. So
being able to see what it's like when a company is closing shop, it's not easy.
It's tough.
Even with all the conflict and moral ambiguity and publicity, what was the last week like, the last day?
It was almost like one of those movies, like the doomsday kind of movies, the calm before the storm. They had called us all into a meeting that they kept postponing for 10 hours maybe. So it was like sitting around waiting, and we were all there together. At the time, we had a great chat going on Slack where people had like basically gone into full humor mode to deal with the chaos that we were experiencing.
No work was being done at that point.
Nothing. I mean, really, people, the last sort of 3-4 weeks, no one was really doing anything. It was like a slow, painful death. And it's almost like, the end of a civilization, like people are dropping. And at that point, the offices had been raided. They had taken a lot of the computers and stuff for investigation.
You were there for when the offices were being raided?
Yeah, so it was one evening. So we came back one morning and everything was just turned upside down. And papers were everywhere and the laptops were taken and everything. So people could literally not do work. And at that point, we actually had quite a few clients left, but people had left, clients had left. But the last day, I remember we were sitting in one of the rooms on the beanbags, and we were all sort of just laughing about the situation and waiting for this, verdict, what's going to happen. I think there was something beautiful about the community and how everybody was there for each other, even though we knew nothing of what was going to happen. A lot of people had gotten new jobs already, or some people hadn't. So we were sort of joking about it. And I remember it being a really, sad, but also very close-knitted community at the end.
So what was the meeting like?
It was short. It was emotional. We had the CEO calling in from New York, saying he was sort of reading out a statement that his lawyers had drafted,
Wow.
saying, thank you so much for your service, goodbye, wish you all the best for the future, we can save the company, kind of thing. And some people started crying, some people, expected it, but it was just this really weird feeling that I think only people who have seen the closure of a company and been there until the very last day can relate to.
Who was the most senior person on site in the room where you were at?
Wow. I mean, most of the senior people at that point had either been forced to leave, or I think it was the head of data science who had become the interim CEO at the point.
What do you do? Meeting is ended, you clock out, and you go home?
We had a last supper.
There you go.
Together. And everybody stayed. I mean, we stayed in touch. We kept checking up on each other. I went to meet up with a dear friend of mine. We had lunch and we were sort of just talking about the irony of the whole situation. And it still felt surreal. It was like coming out of a movie theater, you watch the curtains close and then you leave the movie theater and you're like, okay, now what?
Yeah, detachment. It happened, but it hadn't happened to you just yet.
Yeah.
It happened in the world. It's official. It's closed. It's signed off.
Exactly.
How long after? So you were unemployed. Company went bust. You left the company unemployed.
So I had, at that point, I had interviewed with quite a lot of companies and I had 2 job offers on the table. And I was in the process of, which one should I take?
Well, you felt like you were tainted, like your CV was tainted by the experience in Cambridge Analytica?
A lot of people have asked me this, and I've never experienced a sort of, how can I say this? People have questioned it a lot, but it's usually with curiosity. And when they realize that you are not part of the senior management and you did not make this happen, they actually see the sort of asset in it and the opportunity to learn from it. And I experienced a lot more positive response. And then I'm sure there's a lot of people who didn't get back to me because they thought, one thing or another, but not in my face. I didn't experience someone being very judgmental about it.
So now you're unemployed, you're debating 2 alternative job offers, but you say no.
Yeah, and that was probably one of the hardest decisions of my life.
Where did you have the resources to reject job offers after what I imagine your confidence being low, being unemployed? Didn't you want to just go back into doing and react to that situation?
Yeah, a part of me really wanted to. But as I was saying, this personal crisis that had started unfolding really in front of me with this the professional crisis, really, it saved me. It became this sort of inner calling to explore a whole different way of doing things. And as I committed to myself, saying no to that offer without having, a huge amount of safety was really, really scary. But I had, the second I committed to that, there was a freelance project that popped up that gave me the opportunity to spend the summer working a bit, but also really taking time for myself. And I decided in the beginning to, I'll take the summer, I'll figure out what I want to do, I'll work on this project, and then I'll take it from there. And I really, really gave myself permission to go deep into myself and to really rethink how I wanted to live my life, what moral values did I want to lead by, what was my vision, how did I want to, put myself out there in the world, and what's the story I wanted to live.
What's it like in that space before the freelance gig falls in, before you decide to recommit to finding your new vision?
It was the hardest phase of my life because I'd never felt so lost. I had an incredible community of people around me, friends and family, all had great advice, but none of that advice really resonated with me. So the hardest thing was really to trust myself and to know that going in the direction I wanted to go meant to also hear the advice from people who had my best, intention in mind, but also to go my own way. It takes a lot of courage to listen to yourself.
Did you feel you were being courageous at the time?
I felt very scared at the time. It was really a huge amount of fear within that decision. But the second I had committed to it, there was something that shifted within me. It was like this little seed of belief that started growing in me. And I was like, okay, if I can make that decision, that also means I can make another decision and another decision. And, I can keep listening to people around me, of course. And I always seek advice from mentors and from people that I look up to. But in the end, you're in charge of the story you're crafting. So if you keep following other stories or others' advice, you're going to start drifting in different directions. And you're going to do it fast.
So this is where we come full circle. Having experienced a broken narrative professionally, morally, and having taken the time to recover and recuperate, and setting up your own company that's doing exactly that, finding the right story and the right way to tell a story. What advice would you give to people who have experienced a professional crisis that leaked into an identity crisis, when they are now at the point where, my startup went bust? I don't know what to do next. Should I go independent? Shouldn't I? How would you help them manage that particular time of uncertainty and unease?
I think what really helped me, and this was probably not an intentional step, but rebuilding your own mindset and your own narrative before you have anything, before you have a new idea, before you have a new company to work for, is so much more rewarding. Because if you jump into something new straight away and you start building that, you're going to start tying your own personal narrative to that. If you just sit with the pain, you sit with the uncomfortable situation you're in, you're going to start to feel a different kind of strength within you, knowing that whatever you go through, and this is not the only fall I'm going to have in my life. I'm very prone to risk, so there's going to be more. But knowing that you have that foundation in you, no matter what attachment you have in life, whether it's a relationship or a job or a house or money or things, that foundation is what you are going to live with the rest of your life. And sometimes the most profound parts of a narrative is the space in between the stories. So it's that pause, it's the silence when you don't rush into a job interview or to a new business plan or to a new activity. It's the space where you just sit with yourself, with your own soul, with your own identity, and start to question what that is.
Alexandra, this has been one hell of a ride, personally and professionally and intellectually. Where can people go to learn more about you and the work you do?
So we've got a lot of really exciting things coming up this year. I'm working on an online course to actually help share a lot of these insights and strategies that I've been building. Follow me on my website. It's tribe3.co, or go to my Instagram, which is my personal handle of ALWXL. You can get in touch with me. I'm super happy to, help people who have or are going through a similar process. So just send me a DM or email me if you're interested to work with me professionally. It's alexandra@tribe3.co. And yeah, I'm here to talk.
Alexandra, thank you so much for your honesty, for your openness, for your bravery in seeing the full circle of that crazy story. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and I wish you all the best.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.